Hello, world. How are you? Super excited to have you all here. I am Monica Kang, your host at InnovatorsBox and Creativity Show. And you know, how timely is it? Yes, it is Memorial Day for those who are in the States, but you know, the show must go on. We have a lot of conversations to continue on. We want to continue the celebration of what it means to be Asian American, Pacific Island Heritage Month, and being Asian American, and also tackling mental health, and of course, being an innovator. And as many of you have been part of this show, we talk about, what it means to think about, being an innovator. How do we think differently? How to have the courage to do something different? And each week, I've been introducing you with different friends and asking them, how are they navigating the landscape of what it means to be innovative in their own domains. And so today, how timely is it? We spoke in the last few weeks in, general mental health, with my friends who's a therapist and mindfulness practitioner. We also talked about entrepreneurship. And now I want to dive into what it means in public policy, because for those who know me, I have worked in public policy a little bit before. I was in government, worked as a contractor, and specialized in nuclear weapon security. And so I do still have a lot of good friends and contacts there. And so when it came to the question of, well, can you actually be creative even if you are in public policy, or if you are working in the government or working in an international organization, I know it's a yes, and let me tell you that there are tons of great people who are out there, and really excited that we have some here today. And first, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Grace, which I believe who's tuning in from New York. Grace, are you there?
Hi, hello from Queens, New York City, sunny Queens. How's it going, Monica?
I'm good. If you do want to share a little bit about your background so that people get to know you.
Sure. So I'm Grace Choi. I'm the Director of Policy at the Mayor's Office here in New York City. Monica and I had the pleasure of also working at the State Department together. I previously lived in Washington, D.C. for 7 years and worked for President Obama on the campaign in his 2012 re-election. And then I worked at the White House Liaison's Office and the Global Women's Issues Office. And I have a background mostly in politics and campaign and policy making, also from Georgia, the South. And so I had a brief stint in the gubernatorial race for Stacey Abrams for governor in 2018 and led their Asian American Pacific Islander outreach for the state of Georgia, which was the first time they ever did that for Georgia. But yeah, I'm just really excited to be here to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Grace, for being here. And I think it's so timely because, especially with your work, I believe your domain of work actually influences both both kind of topics, and coincidentally they're both in May. But before we dive a little bit more into that, tell me a little bit more on the back end, like what even got you into public policy as a field? Because I know even for me, when people ask me that, there's often like a storyline of like, well, when I first worked here, or like when I was there, like so I'm curious to hear your part, like, because there could be so many other things you could be doing. Why are you doing what you do now, and why do you care so much about the stakeholders that you serve?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like any good Korean immigrant daughter, it's because of my mom. So my mom, when I was a freshman in college, saw in a Korean newspaper in Atlanta a little advertisement for a White House internship. And so she would cut it out, put it on my desk every day, and tell me to, Grace, apply to this White House internship. And I mean, I'm a pastor's kid, had no connections to politics, didn't even really know what politics was. But just to get her off my back, I applied for the White House internship. And yeah, that was my first exposure to politics and policymaking. So in 2006, I had the opportunity to go to DC and meet a lot of great people. But one thing that was unique was in my intern class, I was one of 2 Asian Americans out of 100. And so outside our internship, activities, I learned about this group of Asian American young people and students that were engaged in politics and policymaking. And so, oh, hello.
We have Akshat joining in. Hello, hello. How are you, Akshat?
I don't think I can hear you guys.
Oh, there you are. Hello, how are you?
I think I need to do some setting here.
Okay,
I don't know what's wrong.
We'll let him 1 second, but Grace, please continue.
Yeah, so that exposure just to seeing other people who look like me who are engaged in politics and learning that there are Asian American leaders in Congress, in the White House. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because in the South, in Georgia, where I grew up, I didn't really see people who look like me running for office, getting into positions of power in order to affect change in the policy world. And so that really was how I got into politics, through my mom's nudge. And then seeing, oh my goodness, there are not people who look like me. I need to be here. And me just being in this space and learning about it, it made me realize, okay, this is important. And then learning, of course, of the many trailblazers in the space, like Secretary Norma Mineta, who was our first Asian American cabinet secretary and created the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Caucus and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Sorry, there's so many acronyms, it's so long in the Asian community. Anyway, so many trailblazers like Congresswoman Judy Chu, who now heads up KPAC and is the first Chinese American woman to ever get elected to Congress. But yeah, once you start, you can't stop because you're like, there's a huge need for us to be in this space.
Love it. Love it. No, thank you so, so much, Grace, for sharing that. And, you know, it's one thing that I hope for those who are, you know, tuning in, as I shared often, innovators that we define comes from wide ranges. Some are in fact, innovators in public policy. And some people probably do not. They might not even have a single friend who actually works other than people they see on media or on newspaper. And so I think it's hugely inspiring to not only hear your story, but hopefully I hope they think about, especially if they're students or those in mid-career, thinking about would I ever consider myself in serving, that, you know, hey, there's a lot of cool people doing very important work that has got them stuck into that whole awesomeness of that field, because there's just so much to build on that. So let me just check in with Akshat as well. Akshat, could you hear us? Okay, so hello. I'm gonna tune in. Let's see if I can try to unmute. Hello, Akshat, could you hear us? Are you
Yes,
there?
I can hear you fine. Yes. Can you hear
yes.
me?
Awesome. Perfect. So welcome to the show. We had a little tech moment, but we're so excited you're here. As we were kickstarting, I like to invite different groups of circles of friends to dive into that, because innovators are really everywhere. And Akshat is also at the bank. So Akshat, tell us a little bit more who you are, where you're tuning in from, so that we get to meet you.
Thank you, Monica, and so good to meet you, Grace. So happy to be here, being part of your this Zoom meeting call. We are going on live YouTube. Probably that's my first ever time, so I'm very excited. My name is Akshat, as you probably already heard. I'm living in Washington D.C. since last 7 years now. Well, originally I'm from India, and I've been living multiple countries before I moved here. I currently work with the World Bank as a disaster risk management specialist, as a consultant in Latin America and Caribbean region. And before COVID-19, created the change the world, I used to travel quite a lot. But since last March, I'm working from home and helping many World Bank clients currently in activating emergency response related work. So this is pretty much my brief background.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, for viewers, if you're wondering, wait, how were these two people even decided to be in sharing this space? And it's because I actually know both of them personally, just from two different networks. Akshat and I, we went to grad school together at SAIS Johns Hopkins. So shout out to SAIS. For those, any SAISers out there tuning in now or later on, we went to grad school back then. And we immediately connected and just thinking about, wow, there's somebody who understands the micro and the macro lens of the world and just always trying to do something different. Akshat always brought humor. Grace and I coincidentally not met not so long ago, but we instantly ended up having many long conversations and just saying the question, why in the world did we not meet before? Because we had all these mutual connections, and just the clarity in that, our kind of intention of what we do, wanting to do in public policy, and empowering people around the world, was connected through a community at NetCal and Korean American communities. And so a second point that I just want to highlight is that you never know where you find your innovators friends. These are different ways that, and now they are connected, and you are all connected virtually. And so just, thought it would be great to kickstart on that. And so thank you all. I see Susan and Jen Kim joining us online. Welcome. Great to have you. And, feel free to use the chat if you have questions. This is a live conversation. So let us know what's something that you have questions for any of us that we dive deeper. But for the time being, let me get started and ask some questions back to all of you. So first, let's get a chance to get to know each other a little bit more intimately, because you guys already get traditional questions of like, what do you do? Where are you from? Tell me what you do. But we're not about that. We want to dive a little bit deeper in the personal element of innovation and what it means to how you navigate, yes, bureaucracy and all of that. So let's see, Akshat, could you do us a favor and pick a color and a number?
Oh, sure. My favorite color is brown, so I'll go with the brown.
I don't have brown though. I have only
Oh,
yellow. Yep.
oh.
It's from
Well,
the,
here it looks brown. So why don't
is it orange?
yes, that one. Yeah, just go for it.
Number?
Number 2.
Number 2. Okay, so Grace, I want to go to you first. If you can answer this question, how would you describe water if you had never seen it before?
Oh my gosh. Okay. It feels like it feels refreshing. It is lucid, clear. It can come in different forms, in air, in something concrete, or in I can't say the words. Liquid. It's animals live in there, under the liquid, in the liquid. It can be clear or bluish or greenish or brown, maybe black, unfortunately. It's really good for your body, and it replenishes your soul, your mind, and your body.
Thank you for sharing that. And as we kickstart, for those, the reason why I like to ask this is because, sometimes we're so used to saying certain things that it takes a moment for us to pause and think about, wait, how do we even make sense of water? And, Grace, actually, I think what you just described is a wonderful conversation for us to dive a little bit deeper in a little bit when we talk about how do you make sense of even public policy when it feels like water. It's something, in a way, how ironic is that, right? In a way, it is something that we all see. We see it in the newspaper. We hear it all the time. But how do you actually make sense of it? Sometimes it's black. Sometimes it's like clear. And sometimes it's murky. So thank you for getting us minded in that. Could you pick a color and number for what Akshat is going to answer?
Yellow 4.
Yellow 4. Akshat, are you ready? Let's see. Give me 1 second. We have you on mute.
I'm really nervous about this.
What is one thing you do each day that matters to you? This is a reflection question.
Oh, that is a very good question. One thing that matters to me a lot is to talk to my family members and friends. I think I really need that. A lot of introverts right now are so happy to be by themselves and getting this as a mandate rather than struggle. It's other way around for me. So I'm an extrovert. I drive energy, inspiration, everything from the external world. People, I love people. I, as much as I can go on and on talking to people and learning about the stories, and they inspire me. I think more or less, that's kind of connected with the water question. How water is important ingredient in our life. To me, the stories are very important to me. Like learning people's story day to day, it kind of puts me into that mindset. place, place where I'm very mindful what's going on around me, how people are changing around me. So yeah, to answer that question, one thing which brings a lot of meaning to me is daily to talk to family members and friends.
Thank you for sharing that. And as you said, funny because whenever I do this, I mean, they're complete folks, like for those who are joining online, they always never know what question they're going to pull out, but it really connects back to reflection of how deeply rooted to the work that we do when it's connected with what we care about, when it's connected to what we are passionate about. There's always a connectivity to it. And so with that being said, let's kind of start diving into it on some of our themes. And I'll start with maybe the elephant in the room. I'm sure you already hear enough about this. Like, oh, you work in government, you work in public policy. Oh, I'm sure you have a lot of boring things there. There's like, only boring people there, right? And I see both of them already chuckling and laughing. So Grace, I want to check in with you first. Like, I'm sure, you work with now a lot of different people, both within the domain of work that you've worked in, all these different industries within the public policy realm. But I mean, like any industry, there's different types of people, but how do you actually navigate? Like, is it true? Maybe help us debunk. Like, what is it actually like working in public policy for those who have never worked there before? To think about, oh, there's no innovation there.
No, that's a great question. I would say, okay, I'm a big fan of karaoke, or in Korean, of 노래방. And it's like going into a different karaoke room with people playing different music. Let's say some people like rap, some people like rock, some people like K-pop, some people like bluegrass. And so it's like you're working with all sorts of tunes and different styles of music. And then you're weaving in and out of the karaoke room, singing the songs, building relationships, or you're singing the group songs together, or just listening and supporting the person who's singing. But at its best, I think in policymaking and politics, it's a lot of bright minds who want to do good in the world. And you're trying to bring everyone's best talents and thoughts forward, and then see how you can make beautiful music in each karaoke room. So let's say there's like nuclear nonproliferation. What is the song that they're playing over there that, let's say it's like, maybe it's not classical, but let's say it's classical music for some reason. And then in women's rights, let's say it's top 40, like Beyonce music. How are you going to make top 40s Beyonce music and then instrumental classical music come together and then work together in order to not overpower one another, but work alongside each other and weave and bob and weave in order to coexist and show that each lane has value and is important? So that is a very creative way I'm now thinking on the fly of how I can see people in public policy being super innovative and dynamic and fun. And so I think it really depends on how you approach your workplace. If you go in thinking people are going to be boring, they'll be boring. But if you go in thinking you're going to have a great time at this karaoke room, you will have a great time. And I think that mind shift really changes what you actually experience with your colleagues, and then the policies that come out of it as well.
Thank you for highlighting that. And, a true reflection of how much of the mindset and attitude makes a difference. And I think that is beautiful because whether somebody who, I mean, all three of us, I know we do care about public policy. We do love it. Even though I'm no longer in that actively, it's still a domain that I care very much. And I love the example that you shared because it's really in our lens that we limit what we see and what collaboration could be. And I know you're doing a lot of innovative approaches, but actually I want to turn back to you and checking in how you're navigating. So that's one thing, to be mindful and respectful of everyone's difference, but how do you actually navigate the differences at a place like the World Bank, where it's global and cultural and historical context, where sometimes you might not even know, honestly, how to pronounce that other country's name or understand the whole context and build relationship and work through projects? Tell me, what are some creative ways that you found to be work effectively?
So, after listening to Grace, I think that's the best analogy to explain that, how we do orchestration of different pitches, voices, and noises. In this world of public policy, nothing is a garbage, nothing is junk. Every single thing which is produced through deliberation, discussion, comment passingly made, concerns, coming up. And I'll get a little bit more specific. Where I work in the World Bank, my day-to-day job involves, doing a communications job, the intergovernmental, interagency communication, bringing message from the World Bank to the client and translating client's requirement for the World Bank language. And so what works in our advantage is basically coming from a very distinct culture. It really puts us in a great advantage. Meaning that I come from a country like India, and people who grew up in developing country have a greater experience of dealing with people who are functioning at multiple strata of the economic level. So you can talk to a poorest of poor peasant, to a president's, a secretary who needs to know in like 3 sentences, what is it we want to make that peasant's life better, and that should come out from president's press conference. Now, all these things, having worked in these different strata, dealing with people, it really comes to your help. Knowing languages, multiple languages, it really helps to define the same thing. How can you say the same thing in a different language? I can tell one from my experience when I lived in Botswana. The story was there that when the British provided protectorate to that little landlocked country, they had to train the local troops. But the first thing they had to do into training is to do parade. In a parade, you need to know at least 2 words: left, right, left, right, because that's the first command they give. Now, what about the culture who does not have that idea of left and right, or they have much more nuanced understanding of than left and right? So how they come around that? So they would use their existing. So what the British did, they gave in one hand a paper, and the right hand would be the paper, left hand would be the grass, and the word came haras pampiri, haras pampiri, haras pampiri, and that the left right became. If you know this kind of anecdotes, it's easier for you to work in another country and try to understand what is it what we are trying to get from them, how they describe it. And there that's when the creativity comes your play, right? Then you can tell this story to them in a meeting with your colleagues and also your client colleagues, and they are on board to talk a language which is unfamiliar to both of them. Leave their preconceived notion, or preconceived understanding, like, no, everybody should know at least this basic level of understanding. As common sense is not found commonly, same thing applies in public policy. Whatever is common sense to from World Bank's point of view may not be the common sense from the client's point of view. So the creative way of thinking, knowing multiple languages, and then I apply a storytelling method, which I've lately started working on and been doing pilot testing with the World Bank projects, and soon you'll get to see some result out of it. But basically, the storytelling idea of storytelling came out from there, that if we learn the story of your ultimate user of the project, that would inform us much better than the data. And big data, that so-called big data right now, it's very so much in fashion in public policy.
Yeah,
So,
no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, there's so many connectivity to connect to what Grace was sharing, what we were just speaking about earlier about. In a way, it's always, how do we make sure that recognize that, like policy, like water, there's really no one way of doing things. Maybe right and left, that's one way of doing it in one community, but it's something else, and just staying open and staying curious with that. So thank you, Akshat, for sharing that. Grace, going back to you and how you feel about it, because this month, as we spoke about, is an important month, especially in your work of domain. Tell me a little bit more how you are able to serve your community more in a creative way with mental health, especially in your stakeholders currently in New York with COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we're all trying to figure out in government how to engage virtually. I mean, in the private sector, in the entrepreneurial world, folks have always been engaged online, have had virtual meetings, webinars. This is all new for government. And I think what has been really exciting is how I've been able to work with my colleagues who run our social media shop in the mayor's office and think about ways how we can still engage with, for this month, especially because it's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month, what can we do to uplift the stories and and show that we are still connecting with the community while we are social distancing, working at home or being at home. And one of the cool things we've done is I saw that on Facebook, there was an I Love Chinatown campaign in order to bring together all these different Asian American artists, singers, comedians, writers, all these folks, not only here in New York, but across the country, come and celebrate Chinatown that has been hit hard by the racism towards the Asian American community, and has had huge business loss too. And so it was a COVID-19 relief fundraiser online while engaging in the celebration of our community. And so what I was able to do is pitch it to our social media manager and my boss. Let's virtually engage in this. We can't be there in the physical. A lot of times we have time constraints and we can't go to Chinatown and show our respect for the community, but let's actually go stream online, say hello that we're there, and engage and comment. And that was one, innovative way. Government normally doesn't go like onto social media streams and say, hey, I'm here and I care about you too. But I think it really helps that there are young people in government trying to think of ways in order to think outside of our, two-dimensional boxes and finding ways to do this. And we're actually going to be hosting a really exciting, this is a little pitch for what we're doing this Wednesday at 1 p.m. on facebook.com /NYC First Lady. We're going to be hosting a really exciting mental health and faith event during COVID-19 at 1 p.m. this Wednesday, May 27th. And it's going to be a celebration where we're able to highlight not only the stories of small businesses in New York City who have been, just fraught with anxiety and stress from COVID-19 and the business loss as an Asian American business. They turned it around, relied on their faith community, decided to raise money in order to feed frontline workers, nurses, and doctors here in New York City. And so that is going to be featured at our event on Wednesday. And then we get to hear from two prominent faith leaders, Kay Warren and then Reverend Kendra Frazier, who is the head of a mental health center at one of the biggest Black churches in Harlem in New York City, and talk about what they're doing in order to address the crisis of COVID-19 that is affecting Black and Brown lives. As you know, Black and Latinx communities have died at disproportionate rates of COVID-19. And what this center, which is called the Hope Center, what kind of hope it's bringing to build resiliency during a time of so much loss and grief. And we're doing this all virtually. We've never done this before. So this might be, I've done this, this is nothing new in the startup world, tech space for government. This is huge, guys. So just a couple of examples of what we're doing to think innovatively during COVID-19 in New York City.
I absolutely love that. I mean, Grace, thank you very much for sharing that, because it really reflects on that we're all just figuring out. And this is the very reason why that I hope, as for those who have been tuning into these shows in the past few weeks and months, I mean, creativity is of essence. That's why when I first started these conversations, I said creativity is in business. It always has been, because there's just so many need of how to think differently. In a way, because of COVID-19, we're needing to find more creative solutions through that. So Grace, thank you for sharing what you do. And just want to shout out to Susan Simon Kang, who shared, I'm really concerned about the discrimination against the Asian American community during this period. So thank you, Grace, for sharing that about it. So actually, kind of tying that together, I'm curious to hear, what are some creative ways, especially with your work at disaster management. I mean, this is a different type of disaster that we're all facing. Do you have any insights that you would share in how the global community is able to work together, and maybe for us to keep in mind any initiatives that you've recently done in a different way that challenged you? Because I know for World Bank, like even as somebody who lives in DC, there's a lot of in-person events. I haven't been out other than grocery in DC. So actually tell us a little bit more, like what are some creative ways that both you and your community has been doing so that we can learn more?
Yeah, no, honestly, every time I hear Grace and I realize, well, we are not doing anything nearly what she's doing, directly helping the community, reaching out to, I think government's main job is service delivery. Grace is at that forefront, and somehow these guys are the people who are, helping the frontline workers, like doctors and sanitation workers and healthcare professionals, policemen, all these people who are actually managing the crisis on the front line. Well, when it comes to the World Bank, especially with the headquarter, the role is very limited in terms of providing essential financial support to the respective client governments. And that's what we are trying to do at this point. With the World Bank, we are always available now because you know that we work in all time zones, right? That means we are 24/7, 365. Just 2 days ago, I was not able to sleep whole night because I was actually conducting a training in Pacific, and that was their daytime. So we have to work in odd hours, remain available on virtual connection. Not all the countries have a great internet connection, so it's another challenge. But thankfully, most of the clients whom we are interacting day to day are able to at least check their emails, respond to things via email. And in a way, this has created another boost for virtual platform. A lot of countries are also trying to do a cashless transfer, switching from cash transfer to cashless transfer. They were already doing prior to COVID-19, but after COVID, it has become a need, not just at one of the options, right? Because it has become a need. And same thing with the information exchange. Virtual platform has become our need more than option. We are regularly conducting meeting via virtual platforms, addressing clients' need. One of the things which I'm currently involved in it's called contingency emergency response component. This is a little component added into any World Bank loan, which is approved for whatever project objective. So, for example, in one country, it was to build a dam against for the flood proofing, but that money was given for the dam and the money is not spent completely. You can turn that remaining money into your COVID response related activities. So my job is to actually understand what is the need at the country level, translate that into the World Bank's language, and understanding for the World Bank decision makers to make, and then present that along with the client for the board to get approved. And so I've been part of this at least 3 approval processes, at least all the way. And this has been really challenged, not just for our client, World Bank client, but for me, because it's a very different world out there. The need for Myanmar for COVID-19 varies from need of Suriname and Belize, the middle income country who are relying mainly on tourism, but have no active COVID-19 cases. They are worse affected, and they don't know how to explain how bad they are affected, because they don't have a death figure to show. They don't have growing infection rate to show. So how creatively make a case to explain that this is not just a health crisis, but it's also an economic crisis. Not only it's also making poor more poorer, and therefore cash distribution or universal income there are a lot of innovation going on around that prior to COVID-19. Now it's time to test. So now sometimes you're testing the pilot and also making sure that the pilot works fine so that you build a policy. It's like a public policy on a steroid. This is where we are. And so that has its own challenges.
No, thank you for highlighting all of that. And, I think it's just a reminder as all of you are tuning in, one of the things that we are very intentional about trying to show different voices and different perspectives is that, both of them are doing very critical work. You're probably doing very critical work for those who are tuning in. And I hope you're recognizing that the more we cross-pollinate these conversations, the more we hear from one another, even Akshat made the point about, Grace, just hearing from you. I now have these other ideas, or maybe I want to build on that. I'm sure if I go back to Grace is going to share, well, now I have these additional things. And I think that's the beauty of innovative mindset and how, what's happening here. And I hope that's happening for you as you're watching and thinking about what are different ways that you can bring in. So I want to make sure we tie this a little bit deeper into, coincidentally, as we talked about at the beginning, we are all Asian American, even though that journey and what it means is different. So I want to highlight a little bit more on that, because being Asian American, working in public policy on top of everything that we just spoke about, and happen to be Asian American is an additional layer of kind of quote, quote, label identity, kind of influencing that both positively and, at times negatively shapes. And, as Susan and, Grace has pointed out, the discrimination has happened. And, that's, hopefully a lot of policymakers are thinking about how we reframe that. But, that putting aside, putting a pause, I know both of you, as you were navigating even your careers, you were probably one of the few in every room that you were stepping in. Tell me a little more, thinking about, for those who are out there, whether they are students or innovators who are one of the few in public policy, what's something that you wish you understood better where you are now? Grace, if I can start with you, as an innovator in public policy who happens to be Asian American, what's the type of maybe conversation or something that you just wish you understood better?
I think I wish I had understood how invaluable my voice was. No matter what the idea was in a meeting, for me to speak up and say something, even if it's not 100% what I think is a perfect answer, to just jump in and start spitballing ideas and share my own perspective. Because I found that I would try to find the perfect answer, and then 10 minutes later, I'm ready to say something. The conversation has moved on to 2-3 different topics. It's too late to bring up my own point now. But the more I practice being uncomfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable and just speaking up in a meeting, I realize, wow, people are listening to my perspective because it's not being shared by anyone else. And it's because of my identity, not only as an Asian American, but also as a woman, also as a young professional woman in her 30s. And then also as someone who happens to be Christian as well. There's all these different layers of my identity that come out in the perspective and the voice that I have to share. And especially when you're in a room where no one else looks like you, they're not bringing that to the table. So I think once I realized, wow, I have something valuable to contribute and people are listening, even if they're not, just say something. And then the more you say it more clearly and more forcefully in a gentle way, it'll become easier and it'll become second nature. But I didn't realize, oh, I need to practice this skill set. I didn't realize how important it was to speak up.
Thank you for sharing that. Akshat, what about for you? What was something that comes to mind when you think about this question?
I think it's me, that's not as an Asian American or somebody from Asian background living in America. It's such a diverse society. India is also a very diverse country. Not two Indians speak in the same accent, a common language they're speaking. And so when I came here, I realized accents are such a big deal. And that made me understand that when there are not too many languages spoken, accent has to become a big deal. And I made a peace with it. I think that was one of the things which I learned living here, that even a smallest difference can make you look so different and can typecast you and put so much what you call preconceived biases and notion around you, good and bad both. It's, don't take me wrong, it's there are I remember then when I moved to Thailand, working with the United Nations, my French colleague said, "Oh, Akshat, would you know something to do with the computer? My something is not working since you're from India." And I said, I wish this was part of my constitution. Every Indian should learn about, hardware, solve hardware problem of computer. Now, these kind of challenges or opportunities, whatever you say, they do exist around us. And I probably wouldn't have paid attention to this. Uh, Working with the World Bank, I am kind of, living in a bubble, in a very positive, happy bubble, where we don't get to be judged based on our gender, or accent, or religious background as such. But when it comes to working with the client, I have to be careful. There are things which I work in some very strong Christian countries, and a lot of time when you interact with the client, they ask you questions which can be uncomfortable. They have some idea about my faith, Hinduism, which is borrowed from some basic reading, whatever out is in the pop media, pop culture, including popular newspaper. And I tell you one thing for sure from my personal experience, whatever is out there in the name of truth is often not the complete comprehensive truth. And everybody also reads based on their own interest and their own lenses. They're going to judge you. So those challenges do exist. But then you have to be, as you said, have to be creatively understanding. I remember one time in a meeting, after the meeting, one of the senior bureaucrat in a, I'm not going to mention which country, asked me, like, so which god you believe in? And for the, I just didn't know how to answer that, because to me, all God is just one. There are multiple paths to reach to that summit, right? It's like a summit. God is a summit. So he said, which God you believe in? And I said, many. I couldn't find a better answer than that. And I said, many. I can't even start telling you which one I should start. It's like 33 million gods I believe in. Now, exchanges that. It definitely, we became good friends after that. But the point is, these are the things that I never thought about my identity before. In current time, a COVID happened to an Asian person is perceived differently than a non-Asian person. And, as she mentioned, Grace mentioned, Latino and African American community, are the worst affected. Somebody can argue, a simpleton can argue that, oh, of course they're worst affected because they don't know how to eat healthy, don't take care of themselves.
It's
They are
so
too social,
to say that.
and the people can be insensitive to say that, like,
Mhm.
oh, they are way too social than they should be. But
Yeah.
I think that's our inherent idea to be Asian. We are inherently social people. We can't live without having our neighbors to check on us.
Yeah, no, Akshat, thank you for highlighting that. And it's funny, I respect both of you for, and I hope all of you, as you're tuning in, take a moment to really pause, because, it's funny. I think throughout my career, the gist of roles that we often do when we do any gatherings, and I actually traditionally do this, and actually this show is one of the few exceptions that you're going to see in any of my other shows, but we usually do have a no religion, no politics kind of conversation. But I did not tell them this. I mean, they work and live what they breathe. And what I hope that you're hearing is that it's really important as an innovator and a creative that, yes, it is in one cases sometimes, in respect to others, because you don't know how other people would feel. The respectful way is to not talking about it at times, but ignoring it is a completely different course of action. And so what I hope you're seeing here in our conversation is we're acknowledging it. We're acknowledging our differences. We're acknowledging our similarities. And that's where I think respect and innovative solutions come from. So thank you both for sharing both of that. And I hope the listeners are thinking about, wow, so there is a healthy way to have this conversation. And I think that connects absolutely to our theme of what we've been speaking about, what it means to be an innovator in public policy, because these are two topics they will have to dwell whether you are there or not. So I want to do something slightly different. Do you have a piece of paper and pen with you by chance next to you? Okay, so I want you to write down, based on what we spoke about, and maybe for those who are joining live, take a moment, maybe you can put it in the chat box, what comes to mind, but I want you to write down all the skills that you found to be really, really important, especially as an innovator in public policy. And start writing all these skills now. And as as they write down their skills, the reason why I want to take a moment to do this is because there's probably so much that we can go around and list, but I really want to do a quick demo to show about it's really not just one or two things. And so I'll give them a few more seconds to think about what are as many skills, especially as an innovator in public policy. I mean, we spoke a little bit about bureaucracy challenges, how to show your full selves into it. And if you guys are ready, I would love to hear what you wrote. And I'm gonna actually do the same thing because I would not be fair by saying this. Open. And again, for those who are here tuning in, just take a moment to pause and think about what skills do you think is important, especially if you are in public policy or working for a stakeholder like that. Okay, and we're gonna see what happens, what we have. Are we ready for this? Okay, so 1, 2, and when I say 3, I want you to put the paper to the screen so that we can see. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Share your text, and we're gonna take a look. Wow, look at that list. I love it. I love it. I know my handwriting's a little awful, but Grace, can I check in with you first? Tell me what you wrote and why are those skills important?
Sure. I put communication, so that's not only in writing, but also in speaking. It's a lot of short memo writing and short email writing, and really communicating your point across as easily and as quickly as possible. I feel like I'm such a good email writer now. That's like most of my life.
It comes handy though.
And then, being good at hosting and navigating meetings over conference calls. I mean, that is a skill set in it of itself. And then I put coalition building. So coalition building, not only with your internal stakeholders within your organization, but external stakeholders, and then bringing those two worlds together to make sense. So internal stakeholders, let's say it's the comms team, the fundraising team, then it's the policy team, then it's the legislative team, then there's just so many different stakeholders internally, and externally is even more. And as part of communication, I put compassionate listening. I think a lot of people just want to be heard, especially in a bureaucracy where you feel like you're just one little cog in the machine. You are an important cog and you want to be heard because your voice matters, right? You feel that way, they feel that way. So compassionate listening, speaking back what they're saying, integrating that in to help with the internal stakeholder coalition building, to then eventually engage with the external coalition building. So that's what I put as some of the skill sets that I've developed.
I love that. And just to add on that last bit, every time I forget that, I had somebody tell me this, there's a reason why you have one mouth and 2 ears.
True words.
2 eyes. So if you forget, look at your face and remind yourself, I'm supposed to listen 2 times more than what I say. Okay, Akshat, I want to check in with you. What was your list? I saw public speaking, if I saw that correctly.
I mean, after hearing you're having 2 years, you should listen more. I want to remove that, but definitely public.
It's important too, though.
Yeah, it's very important to be able to speak to variety of audiences, making them heard what you mean. Look, world is not fair when it comes to genders. World is more. It anticipates, assumes that man should speak more openly. And so it has more conducive environment for man to be a public speaker than a woman. And I'm not generalizing this, but I'm talking about from my personal experiences working in developing countries, in traditional societies and all. And so it's very important when it comes to public speaking. It's not about you speak, it's about you voice it, people's concerns and sentiments in a way that everybody should feel a participant, not just a listener of what you are speaking. And that's very important for public speaking. And I learned this specific characteristic from women. There's a difference between the way men speak, and I'm talking about fairly from my experience in developing countries. I've seen women doing much better job in able to sensitively integrating all the concerns in the audience. They read audience much better than men do. And oftentimes when they're getting challenged or interrupted during their public speaking, they are the best people to know how to manage that. So that exactly. Thank you for saying that. That word is empathy. And another thing which I really find it very useful is being multilingual. If you know more than one languages, and if you have a desire to learn multiple languages, that really helps a lot. It makes life easier. Third thing which I really make use these days, photography. Photography is not just a hobby, but it's also my data collection, data sharing, and presenting tool. I use that for my work as well. So photography is another thing which I really, I'm happy that I discover another side of it, not just for the hobby entertainment, but also for knowledge generation. And last but not least, which is very connected with Grace and you were talking, uh, it's that interpersonal communication skill. If you can go beyond the business and develop a communication relationship with your colleagues, you can just ask them, hey, how are you doing? How are things with you? It takes you a long way. It definitely puts you league apart. And that definitely helps, especially when you're doing it for your own personal satisfaction, not for the sake of doing it to tick a box.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Akshat, do you actually have some of the photographies that you will be able to share by chance?
Oh yeah, I would. I would love to. I'm going to. I put up a little, slideshow, some images of my award-winning images, the images which I won award for. So
Wow.
maybe at some point I can share the screen and take you guys through that.
Yeah, well, we might not be able to see all of it.
Mhm,
Maybe we can share one or two, but in the time being, as you prepared, oops, and give me
mhm.
1 second. Are you able to have the share screen?
Yeah, I do have that.
Okay, awesome.
I can definitely share just one or two, and
Yeah,
that
so
would.
as Akshat pulls that out, I want to just continue kind of mapping out that current skills conversation because what I wrote was, just being empathetic, global mindset, not assuming, and just staying open. And that really is at the essence. I think it's so critical, especially at this current time landscape. It is so easy to just go back to our norms where we are. I have a few more questions that I'm going to ask them, but I want to check in briefly. So actually, yes, tell us a little bit more what this is and how this has inspired in the work that you do as well.
Oh yeah. So this is an image of uh, World Bank staff doing yoga in the World Bank building. That event happened last year, and I was volunteering. I'm also a yoga teacher part time. I teach yoga as a volunteer, and I also do photography. So I was doing both the thing at that day, and it's Akshat's favorite day, where I get to do both the things together. So these guys are doing shavasana, which is the last pose you do after doing yoga. You want to relax and let your energy balance out and not retain. And it's kind of a mild meditation while relaxing. Now, the interesting about this image, everybody is doing the same thing, but they all look different. And if you can see my pointer, it's, this lady right here, she was working with the World Bank earlier. Now she's the head of IMF. So having that kind of environment where everybody, regardless of their hierarchy, come together. That one image, which is really the second image right here. It's another recent image which I took in the forest. A friend of mine has a very interesting way of connecting with nature by hugging a tree and trying to feel the vibrations as much as he can. And I took that moment when he was right in that moment. He did not know probably I'm taking the picture. I also won an award for this image. But yeah, these are some of these images which I always think about when we go beyond our body and mind and trying to connect the greater being which we are. Those are the moments which are very magical to me.
I love that. I mean, Akshat, thank you very much for taking a moment to share both of these. And, as we, let me see if we're able to, stop. Yeah, perfect. So no, thank you, Akshat, for sharing that. I hope for all of those who are tuning in right now, it's a reflection to know that, hey, being an innovator in public policy doesn't mean that you just have to be innovative in the work you do. You can expand that to a second side hobby, as Akshat has shared. Grace is involved in actually many, many communities. I lose count of the communities that she's part of, just helping amplify that voice. But what I hope you're hearing and seeing is that you have to find the way that works best for you, that ignites in the best way in how you express your creative form, right? So for Akshat, that is storytelling through photography on the side, on top of everything he said into his day job. And Grace, she's doing that through the community she serves. I actually had the pleasure, Grace, if I can do a shout out, of joining one of your Zoom calls where you just brought together a handful of Asian Americans in the community saying that, hey, can we take a moment to have prayer and also talk about mental health because it's hard. And I had the pleasure of being in. It just was wonderful to have a moment of, pacing ourselves through that. So want to kind of, as we wrap up, because you know how time flies, how fast time flies when we are having fun, before we realize we're almost at the dot. And so as we wrap up, I want to do some closing thoughts. So Grace, on your part, could you share us a little bit more? I'm thinking about specifically right now is an interesting time for all of us, but I'm thinking for a lot of their students and mid-career professionals who's kind of in between. And so Grace, could you share a piece of advice for maybe those who wanted to do public policy, but they are maybe a student right now and not sure how now their future looks? Maybe their internship has been canceled. Maybe they're not really sure if they want to do it anymore or how they can serve. There's also a lot of professionals who are feeling that way. So what advice do you have to share for them? I know I've, seen conversations like take a gap year, like stuff like that, but that's still so nuanced. Like you can't do a gap year if you're a professional. So what piece of advice do you have for them if they want to enter in public policy? Because I feel like this is actually a great time for them to. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think some of the ways that you can engage in the public policy space, I mean, first of all, look at the different ways to stay connected in your networks through social media. LinkedIn is a professional network, and the way that I've connected with so many different types of people who are interested in public policy, it's not people that I've ever met before, but because my profile shows I work in public policy, we're able to have an exchange over chat that can lead to a phone conversation or an email conversation. And I think there are just more innovative ways that people are thinking about how to gather and network online, whether it's like a virtual Zoom call and say, you're interested in a specific public policy matter. Let's say it's environmental issues, or maybe it's about COVID-19 and how to deal with the public health approach to COVID-19, maybe not only in the US, but globally. You can be the person who instigates and starts a Zoom call or a Facebook Live conversation in order to have that conversation. You are not restricted by having a so-called traditional internship where you have to go in and clock out. You can create your own space in the same way Monica did. She's creating her own space through Zoom and then through YouTube Live and having the conversations that she wants with people who are sheltered in place. You literally can have conversations with anyone around the world right now. And so I just really encourage you to think outside of the box, see what your existing tools are, your existing networks. And now you see us, we're also here to be a resource and network to you as well. So reach out to us as well. So that's how I would say, think about how to engage in public policy and having those one-on-one conversations. The coffee meetings you can't have in a cafe now could be a Zoom conversation or a phone call, and that will help sharpen whether I want to go work at the World Bank and see what that space is like working in a multilateral organization like Vishkat. So you just never know. There's so much more opportunities now to engage because we are sheltered in place, honestly. So I think having that open-mindedness mindset you mentioned, Monica, is important, just like you are having with this conversation today.
Yes. No, Grace, thank you so much. And all of those steps, there are probably at least 6 different tips. Better write that down, take action, because we're all about action here. And that's the reason why we're doing these conversations in the first place, because I want to empower all of you, inspire you to know what it means to be an innovator, but not just end there, take action with it. Akshat, I'm going to kind of take a little bit deeper dive into that. I want to ask you, how can people stay global minded when we cannot travel? I'm sure you managed to do so even as an extrovert. So tell us a piece of advice for those who are out there, whether they're a student, professionals, whether they're already working in a global community, like how can they stay more global minded when we cannot travel the world right now?
Oh, thank you so much. This is the one of the most easier question to answer, hard to explain. And I think the thing is what Grace said. I would take a little bit from there, and I'll come to that answering to that global-minded question. I think you have to be good enough local to be global. You need to know what is happening around you locally. Ultimately, public policy is nothing but a good problem solving. A good problem solving only comes when you understand problem better from all its dimensions, from all its possibilities. Not every problem requires some so-called good looking, sexy, as they say, solutions. It can be very simple. Food distribution, working as a volunteer to do the coordination, who's going to distribute food where, keeping that list. All these small little so-called bureaucratic clerical work actually are the steps of that ladder that would eventually lead you to where you want to be. And I think that is very important, to remain local, aware, starting with looking around you where you can contribute, where you can help. Yesterday, I've been talking to some of my neighborhood. There are people who are always out on the street begging. And I started talking to them, understanding how is their life, how is their business model working. Don't forget, they also have a business model right there. How is that affected? So it goes from there. As Grace said, you can also volunteer within your council, within your ward. Reach out to local ward members and representative. And being an somebody who's connected still with my native country, India, I also reach out to my volunteer friends there who are working, and help them as much as I can do, from remaining here, right, globally. Provide them some new technological solution, new app, new ideas that we are, practicing here through. One thing I really like about DC's COVID-19 response is this state of art website that allowed me to inform my hometown in India, to give these guys suggestion that, hey guys, if you ever want to develop a website, here is a framework, here's the model. And public policies are mostly based on one model, improved and tailor made to another. So re- understanding local as best as possible allows you to be more relevant to global. Otherwise, you may want to go global physically or virtually, but you have nothing much to say.
No, thank you for highlighting that. It's so funny because now this is our 25th episode, which I did not envision happening, and we're continuing on this series. And in fact, since I first started making any of these videos, I've already made about 40 to 50 close to videos in the past 3 months, and there's just so much connectivity. So picking back on what Akshat talked about, that last comment, we had a whole episode with Kim Brighton. If you go all the way back last month, we talked about how she's a big advocate of like rethinking about the supply chain and knowing that everyone is a stakeholder of being a consumer, and thinking about how we have to start thinking local. We also talked about the big importance of empathy, even in tech. And as Grace has mentioned, it's so important to think about where you start with and just having that eye. And so with that, this was so great, but I want to honor our time. I hope you all had a great time. We're going to be back again. And actually for June, while Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Month is over for the month of celebration, we have a lot to still continue on in creativity. So it just happened to be, I brought in innovators and experts who were Asian this month. You will still see a lot of other Asian experts throughout the next few months and weeks to come. But particularly for June, I'm excited to focus on the theme of reimagine, right? All of us are reimagining the way we have to work, the way we have to collaborate, the way we even do public policy and these conversations. So we're going to talk about what it means to reimagine gatherings. So I'm going to have a different group of friends every Monday again at 2 to 3 p.m. EST. So join us and tune in to learn about what does it mean to reimagine gatherings for conferences, reimagine education, reimagine what it means in even nuclear weapon security. I'm going to invite some of my friends from my nuclear world and think about where traditionally in person is so valued. How do we reimagine that? And so with that, Thank you, Grace and Akshat. A serious appreciation. And as I final wrap up, just want to add a quote for respect. You know, as Margaret Thatcher said, don't follow the crowd, let the crowd follow you. And as Albert Einstein said, creativity is intelligence having fun. And I wanted to highlight these two things because, you know, as what you heard from both of them, they weren't just waiting around to follow somebody for instructions. When they saw a gap, they dive right into it. And so if you see a gap right now, don't wait. Plunge in, speak up, as Grace has pointed out, you know, as Akshat said, don't worry about, you know, if somebody thinks about your accent, show and share your perspective, because we all need that and we need more understanding. And so with that, thank you all very much. This was Monica King from InnovatorsBox, and we will see you soon again next week. I will